we got ourselves one of the biggest trades, and that's Giannis going to Miami. And I want to just say, hey, Miami, finally, y'all did something. Good job, Pat Riley. You finally came through on getting a big fish. Oh well, if you will. In a sense. Thank God. I was like, because otherwise we were just gonna have to either keep hearing about how Pat Riley gonna have to do something. Who's the next person to swing on and all this other stuff? Were already on it, but it would have been with the Miami Heat of like Anthony Edwards watch and all this other things. It's like nobody. I'm glad it's done. We don't have to talk about it anymore as far as what will the Heat do and stuff like that. But with that has came a whole lot of debate of should Giannis has gone to the Celtics than to Miami, and why Miami is not really any better than the Bucks, and that this doesn't make this all title contention and all these other things. So let's go ahead and just sort of address all the stuff of him choosing Miami over Boston. I was like, that to me, that's really just, I guess, personal kind of, like a because it's like if you go to Boston, it's automatically just going to be, oh, you basically have a better supporting cast, so you're going to basically be ready to play for a title. Which not as we don't necessarily know that. We've seen how we thought they were going to be something. They got beat by Philly. Does Giannis help that? I was like, he helps it, but does that make it any better? Also, like we still got the stuff with Tatum as far as his injury, but let's not also act like their play or how Tatum has shown up in games and disappeared at games and stuff like that. And his career also doesn't have a factor in that. Um, Giannis, where with the Miami Heat, he doesn't have to play the five, where in Boston he probably would have to play more of the five. Just given how their team and some of their best players are. So I think there will be more fits, but they would have at least more things to play with if they wanted to upgrade the team than Miami does. So I will give them that in that sense. But to me, I feel like, and you also have, I think, what we would think of as Tatum being a way better player than Bam. I was like, really is, and it's really offensively because Bam is a better defensive player than Tatum, but that gap is not as big as what you would feel like with the offensive side of it. So I was like, there's that. But Miami, where people are saying that the Bucks, he might as well just be like Bucks down south. I don't think that's at all true. I think Bam, we could say it's better than Miles Turner by a good margin. I think that when we're looking at the guard play, I was like, while you could say who's there to play guard for Miami, because I was like, I don't think they're going, and I don't think they're going to get Norman Powell back, to be honest. But I was like, who is also the guard play in Milwaukee? There's really nobody either. At least they sort of do have Mitchell in it as at least like a piece, part of it. And then Andrew Wiggins, who I was like, I think he's going to probably come. I was like, I think he's going to stay. I was like, he got a player option, so we'll see how that necessarily goes. But even Wiggins now, even though he's not the player he was when he was even with Golden State and stuff, I'm like, who was the other player? Kuzma? No, I was like Kuzma. That we've gone past of whatever he could have been when he was with the Lakers. So to me, that's already an upgrade. Um, and then I was like, they got a couple young pieces that maybe they might be able to move. I don't really know. I don't think they'll be able to move Jovic really for anything too significant, just because I was like, he got his big contract and it's like, but he's not a guy that they play. So kind of harder to show who should trade for that kind of contract. Made me think of when Denver was doing like their kind of contracts on players that you signed to pretty big contracts in a way that's like they don't play to show that they worth that at all. Um, I was like, Pele Larson, they had as a guy that can hit at a good clip. Was I was like showed that he could play for the squad. He'll probably be into it. But the reason I think that Miami isn't as bad or down the dumps as everybody, at least like the people on TV and stuff like that are really saying, is because I'm like, while I was ready to sort of use it as a deterrent of the Celtics versus Miami of like which place to go, but at the same time, yes, they got a top coach. I was like, their organization it's weird. I was like, because I'm like, they're held in high regards. They're a top organization, but also they do a lot of like fuddy duddy stuff too that doesn't make sense as well too. Let's not act like we didn't remember the Dion Waiters, Hassan White's odd years, them never giving Jimmy Butler anybody worth a damn to play along with. I was like, because Bam wasn't who Bam is now, and Tyler Hero isn't who Tyler Hero is now. They were still sort of young. They were still you get what I'm saying? So it's like they still never went and even got upgraded at least on like marginally. But with that being said, the people that they do tend to do really well with is those people that's on the margins. Gabe Vincent, Max Struess. I was like, and even those players I talked about like Waiters and Hassan Whiteside, I was like, they built those dudes up as well too. Now, granted, they gave them money that they shouldn't have. But I was like, they built them up to be something. They just never capitalized on a lot of these things. I was like Gordon Dragic. I was like at a point as well. So they've had people that has come through that they have built and done stuff. Now, granted, did they work other places? Struz has been pretty solid in Cleveland. Gabe Vincent hasn't really done anything since leaving. Um, but I was like, that's where I think that they can capitalize on finding either like some young dudes that basically has been like off cat or just some other guys and it's like getting the most out of them. I think that's where it's going to be a lot better than necessarily the Celtics, who I was like the Celtics. I was like, don't get me wrong, they got really good players. They have built dudes up, paying Pritchard and stuff like that as well. And yes, it's the system that they have, but sometimes that also lets them down in a lot of situations. We see how their amount of threes can either make it or break it for them. Whereas like you don't have to feel that same way with Spo. Now, will they go out here with a title this year? I think I was like, we're gonna have to see what they do get or who they can get, but I don't think it's crazy or out the realm in the way that people are just like Giannis not gonna be able to do it because we're in the NBA now that is showing champion after champion after champion after champion after champion. That I'm like, wouldn't that you would think that would increase what you feel like is the odds of getting a championship? This isn't like when it was like Golden State and Cleveland playing or whatever like that, to where you would be like, I was like, they got a shot, but do they? Here, I'm like, they have a shot. I was like, the Knicks is going to be to pretty much bring back most of their crew. They might lose Robinson, but they're still pretty much intact. Okay, cool. They at the top. I was like, the Celtics, right now, they still got Brown. We'll see if that stays. But if this stays how they sort of got, I was like a couple pieces here and there. Boom, they're right there. I was like, Cleveland, at least regular year, they're probably just going to be just good enough or whatever. But to me, I'm like, you are at least, I was like, so you're at least like five, give or take, however the season plays out, injuries and all that other stuff, which is you have to take in a big account with Giannis as well, too, that they're in the playoffs. And to be honest, as long as you're not in the play-in, let's be honest, who really cares? Because I was like, because after that, it's really about matchups, even more so now than it used. I was like, don't get me wrong, matchups has always played a part in the playoffs, but now more so than ever, it's like who are you facing early on to where you the road you need to take. So you really just want to get into the playoffs. You having the number one seed doesn't stop you from playing anybody that you are going to basically like wash out immediately anymore. I was like, a lot of those teams are really kind of like even in a way that I was like, hell, the Knicks were down 2-1 at a point against the Hawks. So I mean, and I was like, and if they didn't change what they did, we might not even be here with the Knicks. So guess what? Anything possible. So with that being said, though, I will say that the way that now how they got the apron and stuff like that will make it harder for you to make a team in the way that like it used to be back in the day. And the amount of players that they need on their squad as well. Cause I was like, you got kind of like if everything sort of stays the same. I'm assuming Wiggins. I was like, it's staying. You got Bam. You got Giannis. You got Portis. I was like, and you got Mitchell. That is five players. I was like, you should be able to get somebody for at least, the Norman Powell spot or somebody else. And I was like, they got a couple players here and there as well too. So they got enough people. So you just need to basically just sort of fill out the squad. I think go from there. That's where this sort of gets hard because who are you signing? You're either signing young cheap people or you're signing old cheap people. Like they're like you could bring back. I was like you could bring Chris Middleton to join up with Giannis, but Chris Middleton now is. I was like they got rid of him in Milwaukee just because he wasn't the guy that he was. So now years later, I was like, yeah, bench guy. I was like at this point, I was like, yeah, he could probably give you 10, but I was like, which is like he give you some good solid minutes, but how much are you going to be needing to rely on him to depend on what else you get? I was like, yeah, if he's sort of like your seventh guy, you're great. I was like, if he needs to be sort of like your second, I was like your guy off the bench to like lean on, a little bit more problem. I was like, so I was like, that's where the things come in handy. But I was like, if they just need to fill out the roster, take some chances on some guys. I was like, they could obviously, bring back Gabe Vincent. Maybe he could get something back in form, going back to his former squad or whatever. Tim Hardaway, I was like, he signed for probably less than what he really could have got to play with Jokic and stuff. So why not see if he could sort of do the same thing with Miami and Giannis? And I was like, he still is over here being able to shoot at a good clip. I was like, yes, he's always been a streaky guy, but he's still somebody you got to respect and can get hot as well. Because I was like also with this squad too, is you wanted to have people who can shoot around him. I was like Mitchell. I was like Davion Mitchell, who they have at point guard. I was like, his shot isn't consistent in that type of way, but we also seen where he's able to just go on a heater. He rises for the playoffs too, which is also kind of a thing that he can just be over here like, oh, he shot 5 threes tonight. Okay, cool. That's why I don't think I think the Mitchell. I was like, I'll say this before I get to like to other people listening, is that the Davion Mitchell part to me, I think is sort of actually kind of key for the squad, just because he to me could be your Drew Holiday. I was like, a guy that doesn't need the ball, but if you ask him to score, he can score a bit. He can shoot the ball good enough. He's really young. I was like, to me, he plays the Drew Holiday thing, where it's just like the thing with me when they were talking about like Dame and stuff is that Dame being a point guard doesn't. I was like, I think Giannis has a problem with that. He needs a guy who could really just play more off the ball than a wing scorer. I think that's where it's more helpful with like a two guard or a three that can score. I think the point guard is where somebody would give him the ball, know when to give him the ball. I was like, I was like able to occupy an area because you can shoot three, so you got to be somebody that's really worth a threat. Whereas but also doesn't need the ball. That's what sort of Dame was in that situation. So I think Mitchell works really well in that, and I even think Wiggins too. Like Wiggins is not a 3-point shooter, but he can shoot threes. If you get good Wiggins, I was like he can also just score the basketball, and I was like why can't he just be sort of what Chris Middleton was? I was like, defense is still sort of there. And I was like, he can score in the same way that I think Middleton does. So I was like, I feel like if you bring him back, he worked. That's why I don't think it's trippy. I was like, I think a lot of people are tripping on saying that this doesn't really how this all works and all this other stuff. But still, with that being said, I was like, I think if they don't get Norman Powell, do you go look for somebody like Anthony Simons or something like that, a young combo guard? I was like, look, you don't need defense when you have Bam and Giannis on the squad, and if you keep Wiggins and Mitchell, all of them are defensive guys. So guess what? You can have someone just be the offensive threat. And I was like, I don't think he give you the hype of what um, Tyler Hero can do. I was like, look, we didn't think Norman Powell was going to have the seasons that he sort of has been having. So why not Simons, who is still young as hell? I was like, and can score. And I was like, shoot three. He's going to take the shots, and you sort of need that to me. I think that he'd be a good pick of if you don't get Powell and you don't have to sign him big money either. I was like, maybe you only do this for a year as well too. I was like, or sign him for like money. How like guess what? He get flipped later on or something like that. That was like, and that sort of bring me to like the next guy of like Colin Sexton. I was like, I'm not going to get asked for a lot of money. I know they can't really do too many crazy things or whatever, but so I'm like, maybe you're trying to. Maybe I was like, the point with this is getting people who will go down to Miami, play with Giannis, can build up their sales enough to either warrant a contract with them or somewhere else. That's how you sort of have to look at it. And Colin Sexton, who I think went to Utah, looked at it like, they were just thrown away, built himself up, went to Charlotte, And I was like, to be honest, I was playing pretty well, I think. And then he got traded to Chicago, and then, hey, that's Chicago, bro. Same thing with Simons. I was like, look, he showed that he could score in Portland, wasn't needed there anymore. Went to the Celtics, actually was playing pretty well in that system. Then in Chicago, we don't care. And look, I was like, once he gets to Miami, you basically just let him just sort of have that same free range, have him play like he sort of was doing, like with the Celtics, obviously, and the Miami Heat, everything. I think it all. I was like, I think it worked. Another guy I could think of, but I was like, he's on the other side. He doesn't look like how he was early on. Is Bogdan Bogdanovic. I was like, shoot three, decent passer, can play the two. I was like, he does. I was like, don't need to really have, like I said, you don't really need the defense, like, because you got the team with defense on his squad. That I was like, I think he still give you something. I was like, I'm just saying, somebody that should be asking for a lot, cheap, come off the bench, playing that role as well too. I was like, has played, I was like high end, overseas and games and stuff like that. But with Jokic when he was over here, killing it as well. I was like, to me, there's still something there. I just don't think he's been great or wanting to really play with the Clippers, either. I was like, another point guard guy that I was like, Sock has sort of failed, or where you probably going to get him on cheap is Tyus Jones. See how much he still sort of got, or if he just did. Because I was like, Orlando, he didn't really do anything well over there. Didn't really do what anybody. I was like, at all what I thought he would do when he was with Phoenix. With the Nuggets, he was just sort of there, and that didn't seem to work out well when they had him in the lineup as well, with Murray and stuff, but you needed another guard, so he worked, but it wasn't what it was. But I was like, hey, you're trying to get cheap pieces. Hey, y'all can finally try to get Bradley Beal. He got a player option, but I was like, you can finally try to get Bradley Beal and see what that is. Miami, y'all won them a couple years ago. Now it's your shot, right? No, okay. Keep that one to myself. Uh, but you're really kind of looking at getting some Harrison Barnes, Kyle Anderson, um, Bones Highland, erratic self. I was like, that's really kind of what Miami really is looking at. In this sense, I was like a Kevin Herter, who I was like, I thought would pop a lot bit more when he was with Detroit, really didn't. Um, yeah, but that's who they're sort of looking at. And while I was like, I think some of these will be actually pretty fine picks or whatever. But you really just sort of need to fill out the roster with at least some decent players, let them sort of showcase themselves, and then have them being able to be traded. Think of like how like D'Angelo Russell, not saying picking him up, but I'm saying think about how D'Angelo Russell signed that contract basically, and then he just sort of been flipped and flipped and flipped. But it's a contract that sort of going in that I might be traded for something during the year. That's sort of how this is going to have to go for Miami. Is striking on some young players while I was like they're like it's down, like the money is down, or the outlook on them is down, and then flipping them later on or whatever. I put out like a tweet or something like that. I'm like, they had any like second round picks or send them to the Lakers for Dalton, like Connect, just because I was like, that's a dude that I think has still. I was like, he's old. I was like, he's an older player, because he came in the league like at like 22 or something. But I was like, was playing well for the Lakers. Then basically sort of got pulled. I hadn't really seen him since, especially after that trade that never happened. But he was a guy that was like could score, get on a heater. I was like, in college, he showed that I was like, just like other college players though, that can show you they can score many ways. And then when you get to the NBA, you're pretty much regular. Like if you're not in the top picks, you're pretty much regulated to just shooting threes or doing something else. But I'm like, with this Heat team, you need shooting and you need somebody who could really get hot. I was like, it's been a minute, but I was like, he's not a guy. I was like, why not try him, young dude? I was like, if it don't work out, his contract just runs out. I was like, you got a defensive squad. Add somebody who I was like, if defense is the problem for him, guess what? On a team that has nothing but defensive players, he just got to do some. He got to do some good job helping. That's all it is. Just be a nice, helpful neighbor. But yeah, that's where they're going to have to make these picks. But I don't. I was like, but I think we're going to come out of this with saying, oh, the Heat. They got. I was like, they got a chance for everybody else. Because why not? Who outside of the Knicks? And I'll throw the Celtics in there. Who else in the East are you really got to be worried about? Nobody. And I said, record really is just don't be in play-in position. Everything else, you can work it out from there. But anyway, let me know what y'all all think about Miami and who they can get, what their potential and all that other jazz is. I was like, or they could just sign all four of his brothers. They could do that as well, too. Hey, that fills up a lot of spots. Anyway, let me know what y'all all think. Till then, peace. We out.